helps a lot.
It helps a lot?
Yeah.
Okay, welcome. This is me with a microphone, so my wild gesticulations you will not be seeing today. I hate that for you. Okay. And welcome to our online audience. We're so glad to not see you, but know that you are seeing us. You are part of us, and we are glad you are here. And to those who are here, thank you for coming. You know, these beautiful days, it's kind of a challenge to, get in your car and come here, and I appreciate it. To be with us and listen to our wonderful music and just be together. Okay, so today, in the next 20 minutes, you will see me, when Asha begins her song, you always see me fiddling with my watch. It's not that I'm bored, I'm putting a timer on.
For me.
No, for me. For me. Because today, in the next 20 minutes, we are going to cover broad swaths of history. We are going to cover ages and eons. So when it gets to be 20 minutes, if y'all get bored, just stand up. And just put up a sign saying, Melanie, stop talking. So last week, we are talking about creating the new age. Last week, I ended my talk with a quote from Rebbe Menachem Schneerson about our place in history. And I'm going to read it again because it's kind of a segue to today's talk. The quote was this: "For hundreds of years, perhaps since the beginning of creation, a piece of the world has been waiting for your soul to purify and repair it. And your soul, from the time it was first emanated and conceived, waited above to descend to this world and carry out that mission. And your footsteps were guided to reach that place. And you are here now. You are there now." So that sounds, doesn't that sound like an individual mission? You're just going to get up and your footsteps were guided to this place, and here you are to repair and purify the world. That is true. None of us is here accidentally. No one else can bring the gifts to this world that you can bring. But I want to expand on that today. And I want to talk about where we are collectively. I want to talk about where we are as a group, as a globe, as a global community. So let's take a look at the possibilities. Let's take a look at what has happened, back to the broad swath of history, and where this is leading us. In addition to our individual footsteps, our collective footsteps have been guided to this place, to this moment in time. We are in a time of new possibilities, new demands, new opportunities in this emerging world. And we may not even have known it. Do you know you live in an emerging world? Do you know how lucky we are to be right here, right now? It is an amazing time. And we are a part of it, and there's a reason we're a part of it. Many wise observers tell us that for many decades, and now we are entering what is called the Second Axial Age. Who has heard that phrase? The Second Axial Age. I know Asha's like, you never shut up about the Second Axial Age. I know, please, if I raise my hand, will you please stop talking about it? Okay. The Second Axial Age. This movement, this turning has been going on for many years. And its emergence has become more and more clear as time has gone on. We at One World are a result of it. And we are also, along with individuals and communities and organizations across the globe, we are playing our part in moving it forward. Were this movement not happening, I submit we would not be here. And as I go on, you'll understand what I mean. So what is an axial age? What is an axis, right? An axis is a point around which a body turns. We're all familiar with the Earth's axis. We're all familiar with mechanical axes. An axis is a point around which a body rotates. So let's take this notion and apply it to human consciousness. Let's apply it to an age. As we look around, we see our global consciousness, our global society turning. We see it shifting. We see it rotating in fields and disciplines all across cultures, across fields, all around the world. What is this new consciousness? It's an awareness of our connection, of our oneness with each other, of our profound interrelatedness. And it's an awareness that we really did not have before to the depths that we have it now. We see it in science, from evolutionary biology to quantum mechanics or quantum entanglement. I'm not going to ask us all if we can give a thesis on quantum entanglement, but we know generally what it is. Telling us that what we regarded as physical matter, this and this, is in reality what? It's energy. It's all energy. What a notion. We believe we are separate physical beings. Why? Only because the limits of our senses do not permit us to see what we truly are. We think we are individual physical beings because that's what we see. That's what we hear. That's what we experience. But that is not the fundamental truth of who we are. As Neil Bohr said, if quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. Everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. Right? Nikola Tesla said, what are we all? Energy, frequency, and vibration. I mean, think about that. What a mind-boggling thought. And not just us. This stand, this room, everything, not just us. We see it in environmental and ecological findings that show our profound connection with the earth. There's a young Episcopal priest, his name is Matthew Wright, and he is a wisdom teacher. And what he says is that when you take the web of life and you pull one strand, the whole web moves. Think about that. You pull one strand, the whole web shakes. Our technology further connects us. I can hold my phone in my hand when Marina gives it back, and I can connect with people across the globe, right, who have a similar device. That is an amazing thought. We take it for granted, but if we sit and think about it, it is an astonishing thought. We are in a time of connection, collectivism, and mutual responsibility. And so what does this mean? It means that we rise or we fall together. As Matthew Wright puts it, we rise hand in hand or we don't rise at all. Our illusion of separateness, our illusion even of individuality, is a convenience that we can no longer afford. It's just not the truth of who we are. And in a sense, it requires new eyes from us to see it. It requires a new way of thinking for us to see it. So, is there resistance to this new awakening? Yes, we see it every time. 10 years ago I would have said every time we open the paper. Every time we pop up a screen on our computer, we see it. We see violence, we see fear, we see ignorance. We saw it yesterday with the shooting at the synagogue in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh. Whenever there is a shift in consciousness, you will find people who resist it with their fingernails dragging along the floor, right? Kicking and screaming. But the strength of their resistance is a sign of the energy of the shift, right? The more they resist, the more the shift is truth, the more the shift is happening. And I think that's a lot of the violence and the fear and the division we see now, because this consciousness is turning, and people know it, and there are people who are scared to death of it. And then there are people who are leading the charge. And then there are people who are somewhere in the middle. But to me, it's a sign that this consciousness is changing. It's what Buddhist teacher Joanna Macy called the Great Turning. I gave a talk on that a while back. It's just a shift in consciousness, a shift in institutions, a new way of relating to each other. Our world is changing, and it has been for many, many years. And observers are calling it the Second Axial Age, the second age of turning, of shifting. As important as the first axial age. So you say, Melanie, what was the first axial age? I can sense you asked. That was like, yes. I know, just please tell us. Give us 10 minutes of really boring stuff. No, it's not. The first axial age, the term axial age was coined about 70 years ago in 1949 by German historian and theologian Karl Jaspers. And what he noted, if you are a student of history, what he noted was that in the years from about 800 to 200 BCE, there was a transformation in human consciousness, in human thinking, all across the known world. For that 600-year period, it was so profound that he called it the Axial Age, and we are now calling it the First Axial Age. This was the time frame, if you think about it, in which the headwaters came together that formed the world's enduring faith traditions. Think about what was going on in that time. He called it the axis in world history which has given birth to everything else. And why does this matter to us? Because we are still living with these philosophies. We are still living with these theologies and with the thinking and the consciousness that arose then. So what happened? In China, we saw the development of Confucianism, right? In the 6th century BCE. Taoism 100 years later. right, to wildly new philosophies of human potential, of human virtue, of compassion. Who was the first one to articulate the Golden Rule? It was Confucius. In 500 BC, he said, "Do not do to others what you would not have them do to you." The first articulation of the Golden Rule. India experienced the growth of Hinduism, the creation of the Upanishads in the 7th to 6th centuries BCE. At the same time, India saw the birth of who? Siddhartha Gautama, right? Later, the Buddha. Now, we're not sure when he was born, but generally we think in the 6th to 4th centuries BCE. In Judea was the emergence of the Hebrew prophets. Isaiah, Ezekiel, Amos, my favorite, Micah, Elijah. What do they give us? They give us the notion of monotheism. They give us the notion of social justice. Read them. It was Amos. Let justice roll down like water. Right? That was Amos. And what does Micah say? What does God call for you, O man, but to love justice, do mercy, and walk humbly with your God? They were clarion calls for a change in the way people related to each other. They also gave us the notion of individual transcendence, that individuals could find a way to relate to the divine. Now, in Greece, we saw the emergence and the growth of rationalism with philosophers Heraclitus and Pythagoras, and later their followers who expanded this knowledge, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And what did Heraclitus say that was, this is such an aside, what did Heraclitus say that was interesting? I love this stuff. He's the one who talked about the fundamental nature of change. He said, no man ever steps in the same river twice. I mean, take that and move with it. I mean, that's great stuff. And all these different things were happening all over the known world, seemingly independently. Why? Because societies were changing. War was spreading. The development of iron weaponry was growing. Confucius, for example, came up with the notion of compassion, of caring, of virtue, during the time of what in China was called the Warring States. Right? There were 7 dynasties that were battling for supremacy, and it was a bloody and a violent time. So what happened in Greece? We had the Peloponnesian Wars, we had the Persian invasion, we had Athens and Sparta fighting it out. So what does that mean? In these times of profound violence, people generated a call for compassion. People saw, this is not the way we want to live, we can be different. The beginning of the Golden Rule, the beginning of nonviolence with the Buddha, right? What also happened in this time was the concept, as we incorporated the notion of transformation and transcendence, the notion became that transcendence and becoming closer to the divine as an individual involved departure from this plane. It involved looking up to God and being away from the physical plane. So in Christianity, we came up with the notion of we are fallen, we are sinful. In order to get closer to God, we have to look up. We go to heaven, we aim for an afterlife. In Buddhism, you had the notion of samsara, the cycle of birth, life, death, rebirth. And your goal was to what? Leave this plane. Go someplace else. Be in nirvana. That was the contribution of the first axial age to human transformation, to how we related to God. Because what we know, they say that every new generation invents a new God. Because we are different, so we have different ways of seeing the divine. Prior to the axial age, what did we have? We had very earth-based deities. We had deities that were closely tied to the natural cycles. In the first axial age, the individual became predominant. We moved away from the small village. We moved away from tribal collectivism. All of a sudden, you could reach God. So what happened? The Buddha left home. He left his castle. He went into the woods. He fasted. He denied his body in a search for individual transformation, individual enlightenment. That was a new concept. Abraham and Sarah in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures, what did they do? They left home to go in search of the one God. It was a time when people realized that they could individually find transformation and transcendence. The notion was that God was found not here, but there, right? And don't we still carry that with us? How many faith traditions today say, don't worry about here, we're going to go to heaven? The important thing is that you be saved, no matter how horrible your life is here, so that you can be well there, right? There are still inklings of that thinking here and now. But we changed. Our society has continued to change. So when, you say, did the second axial age start to emerge? Well, observers say, now see, these ages don't happen overnight. The second axial age, we are told by many, started to emerge in the 16th and 17th centuries. Why? Because human knowledge exploded. We started discovering new technologies. We started discovering new ways of thinking. We started discovering new ways of living together. The growth of cities, the increase in urbanization started us relating to each other different ways. The decline in the power of the church. What did we have in the 16th and 17th centuries? We had the Reformation. We had the 30 Years' War. We had the Counter-Reformation. We had the decline of Christendom in Europe. We had massive social upheaval and change. Observers mark these years as the beginning of the second axial age. But what has happened? That change has accelerated. It has speeded up and it has continued to happen. Now, we are in a world of evolutionary biology. We're in a world of quantum entanglement. We're in a world where we know, because we are so much more global, that we are interconnected. What does Thich Nhat Hanh call it, the Buddhist monk and teacher? He calls it interbeing. He says we don't exist individually, we inter-are. We just exist because our circle exists. We don't exist independently. I think it was Matthew Wright who said we need to get rid of all those bumper stickers that say coexist and come up with bumper stickers that say just coalesce. Because that's really the truth of who we are. This great web of life includes and enfolds all of us. And in this age especially, we are beginning to understand that more and more. We see it in our connection to the earth. We see it in our connection to each other. This understanding leads us to reclaim the wisdom of the pre-axial age earth-based traditions, doesn't it? All those traditions we neglected for so long. But we don't reclaim them on the tribal level where we first had them. We reclaim them on a global level. We reclaim them from a plane of higher consciousness. We realize, based on all our new understandings of the truth of who we are, that we are irrevocably bound to this earth. And not because there are deities that scare us or are going to put thunder on our heads or whatever, but because it's the truth of how the world operates, how the biosphere operates, how we operate. We claim these earth-based allegiances on a different level. It also gives new urgency to the notion of inner spirituality. Why? Because we are now exposed to all the world's different wisdom traditions. We can use their tools, we can understand their wisdom. We understand that they are the heritage of all of us. It's not that Buddhism belongs to the Buddhists and Christianity belongs to the Christians. Literally, we have to look at it in a way that they all belong to all of us, right? And that's what we do as an inner spiritual community. We take tools here and here and here, and we use them to craft our individual spiritual paths. They are a heritage that belongs to all of us. In the second axial age that we are in, we also take a different view of what is sacred. And think about this for a second. In our earlier ways of thinking, the transcendent was what funneled up to God, right? Now that we realize our oneness and our connection, instead of that, what is sacred serves as a channel for the transcendent to illuminate us here. It serves as what is transcendent is when our divine understanding, our appreciation of what is holy, enables us to see that everything on this plane is holy. instead of ignoring our bodies or regarding them as extra or diminishing their importance, what we see is the face of the divine in every single person. Every act we do is a holy act. Every connection we make is a sacred connection. Transcendent is not there. Transcendent is here. We are not looking up to God. God is flowing down to us, as us and through us and enfolding us and animating us and empowering us. It is a new way of seeing our world. And it is the only way that is going to pull us through in our collective future. In her book, A Return to Love, Marianne Williamson writes that the Course in Miracles, of which she's a student, teaches her that love is really the only language. And the way we speak that language is just, initially at least, to be willing. So when we would see a situation of separation or fear or unkindness or division, what we do is we just say, I am willing to look at this differently. I am willing to think about this differently. I am willing to show up differently. It doesn't mean that we all walk into being bodhisattvas. It means that we just open up that tiny space of being willing to show up in this new way. And when we do, the grace of the transcendent flows in and makes it happen. Try it. Next time you are in a situation of fear or separation or judgment, just say, I am willing to look at this differently. That is the sign of the new millennium. That is our access to this new collective, unified, and whole state of being. Karen Armstrong writes that we need to develop this sense of the sacred in human life. She wrote, we can't think God without thinking human now. We can't think human without thinking God. And I would expand that. We can't think God without thinking everything now. Not just humans. We ain't so special. Animals, plants, the earth, everything. We can't see them without seeing God now. It is our key to pulling through. And we can't think God without putting God there, whatever name you call God, without putting God in those rocks, in that person. Even people who scare you. What did Mother Teresa used to say? She used to see folks who had leprosy and folks who were sick, and she would say, it's Christ in all his distressing disguises. And that's what it is. It is the divine in all its distressing disguises. Because, this is Karen Armstrong writes, because the sacred is not something tacked onto our human existence. It's no longer something out there. The sacred must be that to which we all aspire. It must become, in the best possible sense, deeply natural to us. This is not easy stuff. This is heavy lifting. She tells a story that once the Dalai Lama was moved to tears because a Western audience asked him how to achieve instant enlightenment. No! This is why we have practices that help us do it. You know, she also writes, it's not the same as just walking along and seeing a bunch of daffodils and saying, oh, how nice. Even though I do endorse daffodils. But it is work. It is the work of personal transformation is not, it's heavy lifting. Which is why I stand up here every week and talk about a contemplative practice or something which leads us deeper, which leads us to an awareness, which is not a cognitive awareness, it is a heart awareness, which is one reason I love One World so much, because we are such a heart-based place. That is where the knowledge is. It is a heart knowledge that we need to look at each other, at our world, with different eyes. That is the way we walk into this second axial age. When we begin to see our world in that light, see each other in that light, to see the sacred in all things, all events, and all people, we will be on the path to this higher consciousness. Let me end with a quote that I gave you a few weeks ago, but I love it, from Arundhati Roy. She wrote, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way." On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Let's listen. We can all hear this new world breathing, and we can all join in and make it happen. So let's take these thoughts into meditation.